Close your eyes and picture yourself in a modern kitchen. Open the refrigerator. Pull out a carton of milk. Check the expiration date. Pick up an apple. You know it's safe because the supermarket told you so. Now delete the refrigerator. Delete the supermarket. Delete the packaging, the labels, the dates, the entire system that tells you what is food and what is poison. What you're left with is the world your ancestors actually lived in. A world where every single thing you put in your mouth could be your last meal. And somehow, they figured it out. You are standing in a landscape that offers no clear answers. Before you stretches a vast expanse of green, shrubs, berries, roots, leaves, mushrooms. 100 different plants within arm's reach, and half of them could kill you. The other half might sustain you. One bite of the wrong root and your stomach cramps into a knot. Your vision blurs. Your muscles seize. Within hours, you are gone. There is no ambulance coming, no poison control hotline, no one to tell you what went wrong. And yet your ancestors survived. Generation after generation, they learned to read the world like a book written in a language that predates words. The first rule of ancient eating was simple: watch the animals. Your ancestors were not the first beings to figure out what was safe to eat. They had teachers. Herbivores spent their entire lives testing the world with their mouths, and the ones that survived passed their knowledge on through instinct. Your ancestors watched. They saw deer browse on certain leaves and avoid others. They saw birds peck at berries that fell from specific trees. They learned that if a creature with a four-chambered stomach could eat it, a human could probably eat it too. But they also knew that humans were not deer. What worked for a goat might not work for a woman, so they tested cautiously. The test itself was a ritual passed down through generations. You can imagine the scene. A group of your ancestors huddled around a fire. A forager brings back a new plant, something unfamiliar, something that might be food or might be the end of everything. One of them takes a small piece of the root, rubs it against their skin, waits. If nothing burns or swells, they press it to their lip, waits. If the numbness doesn't spread, they hold it on their tongue, waits. If the bitterness is sharp and acrid, they spit it out immediately. If the taste is mild, they swallow a tiny piece. Then they wait an entire day. If they survive the cramps, the fever, the vomiting, the plant becomes part of the collective memory. This is how knowledge was built. One slow, dangerous test at a time. The world your ancestors lived in was a library of edible and deadly things, and the catalog was passed down through story, song, and ritual. You were taught from the moment you could walk what to touch and what to run from. Your grandmother showed you the purple berries that grew along the riverbank. She told you they were sweet, but only after the first frost. Before that, they were poison. Your grandfather pointed out the mushroom that grew at the base of certain oaks. It looked just like the one that killed your cousin. You learned the difference by color, by texture, by scent, by the time of year, by the phase of the moon. You learned that the world did not label itself, but it did speak. You just had to listen. Some plants were so toxic that they became tools. Your ancestors used the sap of the yew tree to poison their arrows. The same sap that could stop a human heart in minutes could also bring down an aurochs from 100 paces. They knew that certain roots, when crushed and mixed with water, could stun fish in a stream. They knew that the seeds of certain fruits were harmless if swallowed whole, but lethal if chewed. This was not science as you understand it. This was survival. This was a million years of trial and error compressed into the instinct of a species that learned to speak before it learned to write. Taste itself was a survival mechanism. Bitterness evolved in plants as a warning. Most bitter things are poison. Your ancestors had taste receptors that could detect a single molecule of alkaloid, the same compound that makes coffee bitter and makes nightshade deadly. Sweetness meant energy. Saltiness meant minerals. Sourness meant fermentation, which meant alcohol, which meant calories that wouldn't kill you. Your tongue was a chemical laboratory, and your brain was the scientist interpreting the results. But even that wasn't enough. The world is full of sweet poisons, beautiful fruits that lure you in and kill you slowly. Your ancestors had to learn the exceptions. The Great Rift Valley in East Africa was the nursery of humanity, and it was a dangerous garden. The savanna was rich with resources, but it was also filled with plants that could kill in a dozen different ways. Wild yams were plentiful, but some were toxic unless roasted for hours. The acacia tree provided protein-rich pods, but the seeds contained cyanide if eaten raw. Your ancestors learned to process their food. They soaked seeds in water. They roasted roots over coals. They ground grains and leached out the toxins. They fermented fruits and grains until the alcohol killed the harmful bacteria. The act of cooking was not just about making food taste better. It was about making food safe. The fire became the first laboratory. You have to understand how deeply this knowledge was embedded in your ancestral mind. The plants your ancestors depended on existed in a specific landscape at a specific time of year. They knew exactly when the wild grains would ripen. They knew which valleys would flood and leave behind edible tubers. They knew that the milk of certain animals could be drunk, but the meat of others was off limits during certain seasons. Your survival depended on knowing your specific patch of earth with an intimacy that no modern human could replicate without years of training. The map of your home was drawn in taste, smell, and memory. And then came the animals. Your ancestors were not just plant eaters. They were opportunistic omnivores. When the herds of mammoth passed through, they followed. When the salmon filled the rivers, they came in droves. They knew that fresh meat was safe, but that spoiled meat could mean a slow, painful death. They developed methods for preservation long before they understood the science: drying, smoking, salting, fermenting. They learned that burying meat in the permafrost kept it edible for months. They learned that the stomachs of slaughtered animals contained rennet, which could curdle milk into cheese and make it digestible. Every single trick was a discovery that someone made by accident, and someone else died to confirm. The contrast with your own life is sharp and sobering. You walk into a grocery store and you are surrounded by thousands of products. Nothing in that building would exist without the knowledge your ancestors built over 100,000 years. Every fruit, every vegetable, every grain, every cut of meat has been selected, bred, and processed for safety. The bitter compounds are bred out. The toxins are neutralized. The bacteria are killed by pasteurization. You do not have to test your food. You do not have to watch the animals. You do not have to press a leaf to your tongue and wait for the cramps to come. You are the inheritor of an unimaginable amount of knowledge, and you have almost completely forgotten how to use it. But it is not gone. Your tongue still tastes bitterness and sends a signal that says warning. Your nose still recoils from the smell of rot. Your stomach still knows when something is wrong before the rest of you does. You are still your ancestors' child. The instincts that kept them alive are buried deep inside you, dormant but present. When you find a wild berry and pause, wondering if it is safe, you are doing exactly what they did. The only difference is that they knew the answer, and you have to ask the internet. And yet something was lost. The knowledge your ancestors carried was not just practical. It was sacred. They honored the plants they took. They gave thanks to the animals they killed. They believed that the world was alive and conscious, and that taking from it required respect. The land that fed them was the same land that would receive their bones. They were not separate from nature. They were deeply embedded in it, and their survival depended on understanding that. You still feel that pull when you walk through a forest. The silence of trees, the rustle of leaves, the deep, primal sense that you are being watched, and that everything around you has a purpose you have forgotten. Your ancestors survived not because they were stronger, faster, or smarter than the world around them. They survived because they paid attention. They built knowledge across millennia, sharing it across languages and cultures, adapting it to every landscape they entered. They crossed the Bering Strait. They settled the islands of the Pacific. They climbed the Himalayas. And wherever they went, they learned what was safe to eat. They learned the water was drinkable or toxic. They learned the fish were abundant or scarce. They learned that the plant with the deep red flower would make them sick, but the one with the purple stem would heal the fever. They were scientists, poets, and shamans, all at once. What remains of that world? The plant is still there. The berry is still there. The knowledge is fading. The elders who carry it are dying, and with them goes the living memory of a world that no longer exists. The supermarkets are full of food, but the forests are being cut down. The species that fed your ancestors are going extinct at a rate unseen for 65 million years. The salmon no longer fill the rivers the way they once did. The herds no longer darken the horizon. You live in a world that has been emptied out and quieted down over thousands of years, until the people living in it don't even know what's missing. The knowledge is still written in the land, but you have stopped reading. Your ancestors could name 100 plants that grew within walking distance of their home. They could tell you which ones to eat in spring, which in summer, which to store for winter. They could tell you the animal tracks, the bird calls, the signs of rain and drought and coming cold. They lived in a world that spoke to them constantly, and they listened. You do not. You listen to machines and lights and words that come from nowhere and mean nothing. But somewhere, deep in your bones, you remember. The ancestors are still there. They are standing in the savannah, eyes scanning the horizon, tongue tasting the air, waiting for you to wake up and see the world they knew. Close your eyes. Picture a land without labels, without warnings, without expiration dates. Picture yourself walking through it. You see a bush with red berries. You pause. You remember your grandmother's voice. You press the berry to your lip. You wait. You are alive. You are exactly where you are supposed to be. You are the end of a line that stretches back to the first humans who ever stood upright, looked at an unfamiliar fruit, and decided that it was worth the risk. The further you get from them, the less you remember it was ever lost. But you still know. In your taste, in your smell, in your fear, and in your hunger, you still know.